Hey, so this video is going to be a continuation of my last video where I showed you guys how to design this very simple mean reversion strategy on Bitcoin. And in this case, all we did was basically calculate the strategy's returns by having a discrete binary long or short signal and multiplying it times the asset's returns. And then we got a nice cumulative return chart like this at the end of it, where we could just quickly eyeball whether or not the strategy made more money or whether it made money at all relative to a simple buy and hold. But this isn't really a full back test, right? Because a full back test, you would expect to give you metrics like, first of all, your cumulative return, your compound growth rate, your Sharpe ratio, your maximum drawdown duration, and various other things that might be of interest to you. And in this video, I want to show you how you can take this code that we wrote and extend it very easily to get a full backtest report just like that. And that's one of the advantages of designing your strategy like this or doing your initial research like this, is that you can go from very fast analysis into a more detailed backtest with very little additional work. So the library that I'm going to show you how to use today is called QuantStats. So QuantStats is a portfolio analytics library. It's open source. It's actually developed by the same guy who created the Yahoo Finance Y Finance library. So this guy's a bit of a legend in my opinion, because he made all this very useful tooling and just gave it away for free. And what we're going to do is just take this code that we already have and add it on. So here's how we're going to do it. The first thing we're going to do is add this cell up here. So you can see here, we're just going to filter out some warnings and some logging messages that I've been getting. These are mostly related to incompatible fonts and things like that. They're completely harmless, so you don't really need to worry about this. But the main thing we're going to do here is first install QuantStats into our Colab notebook environment, because it's not included with Colab by default. So you're just going to use pip install QuantStats, and because you're in Colab, make sure to have this exclamation point in front of it. And a key thing here is make sure to install version 0.0.62. Now, this is not the most recent version of QuantStats, I believe. I believe there are, yes, there's 0.0.63 still. But I personally have had some issues with it. I don't know if maybe at the time that you're watching this, things will have changed. But I have had some issues trying to use the most recent version, just incompatibility problems. So I would recommend using this version specifically to make things go smoother, okay? So let me rerun my cells here just so I have a fresh state, and you can see that it installs it pretty quickly. And then of course the next thing you're going to want to do is import QuantStats as QS, and that's the typical acronym that I use for it. Now the rest of this code is going to be exactly the same as it was in the last video, so I'm not going to go over it in detail. By the way, if you haven't seen that video, I will tag it somewhere around here so you can go and watch that one first. But just a reminder, we download some Bitcoin price data, we calculate some returns on it, and then we define a simple moving average signal on it and design this mean reversion strategy where we go long and short depending on how far away the asset has drifted from this ratio that we've calculated here. Now, let me go ahead and refresh all this stuff here. And this is really what I want to show you is at the end of this, at the end of our backtest, really the main input that we have is just a single series where each date is the time period of our strategy's performance, and then each value is the strategy's return on that given day. And this specifically is going to be the main input to our QuantStats backtest, and it's really the only input that we need. So if I uncomment this line here, you can see I'm going to do quantstats.reports.full, so that's going to be my most detailed backtest, and then I'll just pass in the strategy return series. And let me execute this. And now it's going to give me a bunch of stuff. You can see all the plots it's generating, and it generates it very fast. But if I scroll back to the top here, this is going to be my most detailed backtest that I can get from the QuantStats library. So it tells me my backtest period, the time that it spends in the market, the cumulative return is 84%, the compounded growth rate is 24%, my Sharpe ratio is 0.71. Let's see, my maximum drawdown is negative 54%. That's pretty harsh, but it is a very risky asset that we're looking at here. And we can always change that too. The longest drawdown days is 327. Volatility also 45% annualized. I would expect that given the maximum drawdown. And we can see our expected daily percent and max consecutive wins. I mean, there's a lot here, right? There's almost more than I would even want to look at. Really, the first up to here is kind of what I'm really looking at for the most part. Now, something I like about QuantStats is it also shows us the 5 worst drawdowns, including the start and when it's at the absolute lowest throughout that period. And it shows you the date and the duration. So it's just something that's nice to know. People tend to think that if you have a rules-based strategy like this, it's not very emotional. I promise you, if you go into a drawdown, it's still very emotional. So it's nice to know kind of what the scope and when those would have happened, because then that gives you something to analyze as well as another data point to make your decision of whether or not you want to actually promote this thing into live trading. So we can see our cumulative returns chart here, just like we saw before. We also see a log scaled version of it. And then we just get a bunch more visualizations. So we have our end of year returns, our distribution of monthly returns, our daily active returns, volatility, Sharpe, Sortino. Here we can see our 5 worst drawdown periods. This is actually one of my favorite charts here. So we saw, in a table what those were here, but then we can see visually by the red whenever we are in a drawdown. And unfortunately with this strategy, it looks like we are really taking on some pretty heavy drawdowns. So for example, we enter one here and then we get out of it back here and then we're free for just a little bit before we go back into it and then ultimately exit again around here. So I like this chart a lot. This underwater plot is basically the same visualization of it, just in percentage terms and only showing the drawdown. And we can see our strategy monthly returns as well. So these bottom 3 are the extra ones that I often like to look at. But the point of this video is just to show you that you can generate this whole report using nothing but a single line of code and passing in the daily strategy returns for whatever it is that you've designed. So most of the work, most of the effort goes into first just calculating these daily strategy returns based on whatever your logic is. And then you just throw that into QuantStats and you get a nice backtest like this. Now you can also take this backtest and generate it as a PDF or an HTML file so you can save it or share it around, whatever you'd like to do. But it's really not difficult at all to use this library once you get it installed, which actually, funny enough, is kind of the trickiest part for a lot of people. The last thing I'll show you here is you can actually include a benchmark right away. So here I'm just going to add in the benchmark flag. And before, our benchmark was the returns of the asset, right? The buy and hold returns. So here, let me do benchmark equals Bitcoin, and then these are just going to be the daily returns. And when I add this in, it's going to recalculate. And this is really nice because now it just gives us a side-by-side. So we can actually evaluate these directly in comparison to each other. So the benchmark is on the left, the strategy is on the right. And you can see here that in cumulative returns and compounded returns, the strategy wins by a lot. The Sharpe ratio of this strategy is also much better. The drawdown is not as severe. The volatility is about the same. I'm not too surprised. And yeah, it just looks like our strategy tends to win here. We can also see now visually everything plotted out, right? We basically made this chart before, but now we get it out of the box for free without needing to think about any of the plotting logic or any of the matplotlib code. It just gives it to us. And then if we keep scrolling down here, we can see our returns versus the benchmark, and everything is now overlaid with each other, which is really nice. So that's it for QuantStats today, guys. I think this is a fantastic library. I use it a lot when I'm just trying to evaluate quick strategy ideas. Again, we're not doing anything fancy in terms of the transaction cost modeling or any sort of realism constraints. Those will come next, right? And also keep in mind, this is just, you would consider this kind of a vectorized backtest. It's not, a walk forward analysis or anything step by step. So there's definitely more to go if you really want to make this as realistic as possible. But this is the kind of classic research workflow that I follow, at least when I just need to do some quick analysis. And it's a very simple thing to do. So that's it, guys, and I will see you in the next one.